on Facebook, but also on YouTube. So join us and let us know where you are, but also let us know any questions you have about teaching grammar or teaching functions. So we had lots of comments actually about these topics, didn't we, Zainab?
Yeah, we did.
In the community this week, and there was lots of positivity about maybe teaching grammar. Lots of people saying it was like their favorite part of teaching English. Some said it was nice because it helps learners become kind of communicative. But also some people saying that maybe it's better when the learners are engaged in the learning rather than just being told by us. Because sometimes we as teachers can be quite excited about teaching grammar and the learners are less excited, maybe.
And some teachers aren't as excited either.
Oh, really? Really? Oh, okay. Okay. I've yet to meet an English teacher who's not excited by grammar, but maybe that's something lacking in my life. Okay.
I think I know quite a few.
Yeah. Okay. All right then. So we're talking about a little bit about grammar first, and then we're going to look at functions. And we've had some questions already, but if you have more, please ask them. But Zainab, one of the questions that we had was about do learners need to learn every grammar rule? I have opinions about this, but maybe what do you think?
Yes, this is a common question, I think, from teachers and from learners. I think a lot of teachers sometimes think that the learners need to know all the rules, and sometimes it's the learners that tell the teachers, why aren't you teaching us all the rules? And I think this, the reason for this might be because of the educational context that you were brought up in. In some places, they believe that if you learn everything about grammar, you will become fluent. However, obviously that is not the case, because that isn't how, languages work. I mean, obviously grammar is important. We do need it to understand how English works. We also need it so that we are able to communicate. But we obviously do not need to know every single rule. Native speakers who speak fluently wouldn't be able to explain all grammar rules either. So yes, no, the answer would be no. Definitely, you would not need to teach every single grammar rule to your learners.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that younger learners can learn how to speak, how to communicate without understanding the grammar, without knowing how to explain it. So I think that's one thing to think about. And I think as well, I mean, I was talking to you earlier, Zainab, about a situation where I was observing a lesson and I saw a teacher, they were teaching the present simple, and they taught all the rules to do with the present simple. So for the future timetable, for habits, routines, things that are always true, that kind of thing. And then asked learners to write sentences about that grammar rule. So they understood the form and the rule about how to make the present simple, but they didn't necessarily learn how to use it in the right situation. Because obviously when we're talking about a timetabled event, we're not necessarily talking about habits. So I think one thing to remember when we're teaching grammar rules is the context, because you have a reason behind why you're using that grammar rule in that context. And I think giving people language for situations and contexts, I think, is important. Yeah,
that's a very good point. I mean, we do need to think about what type of grammar we should teach our learners. We need to make the right decisions. So we shouldn't ask ourselves, which grammar point or which grammar did I still not teach, but it should be what should I teach that they need or that they can use. The reason to teach grammar is to get them to communicate. So it's not just teaching them a set of rules and having them, do a worksheet so that they're actually structuring it correctly. The reason is to get them to communicate. So if you're teaching a grammar concept, but you're not giving them that time to practice it, there's really not much point to that grammar lesson. They need to know how to use it. And you don't want to overwhelm them, as you mentioned, by giving them everything at once. You just give them what they need. So, for example, you would have to think about many factors, such as their age, their proficiency level, what they need it for, their communication needs. You'd also have to think about curriculum and exam requirements as well if you're teaching at a public school. So there's a lot of factors that come into it, but you do need to make the right decision and to make the decision on which grammar points you should focus on and which ones you don't need to teach just yet. And then also focus on communication as well.
No, I think those considerations are really kind of important, because sometimes when you're teaching, the idea is that there is an order to how you learn a grammar point. And I think one thing to think about is when you're kind of like, I was giving that example before about the present simple, is like that teacher didn't look at the course book and what present simple was needed for that course book page and that context. They just thought about present simple in general. So I think one thing to think about is obviously that there can be an order, but also the order depends necessarily on the students themselves, and I think that's a really important thing to think about. I mean, I remember, this is a long time ago, but I had a primary class and I taught them I wish, and they were maybe 7 or 8 years old, but they got the concept of like I wish I had quite easily. But usually we're told, oh, you can't teach that until they're maybe upper intermediate, like a high level student, because it's quite complex. But if you've given them a context for that language, I think you can basically teach anything. And that comes back to what you're saying about if it's got a communicative kind of purpose to it, then that makes it kind of more meaningful. So
definitely, yeah.
There's been some comments from different people. So we've got people from Sri Lanka, Algeria, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Libya, which is great. We've also had some results of a poll where 100% of the people in the poll said they enjoyed teaching grammar, Zainab.
Ooh,
so
that's great.
Yeah, exactly. I know you said there were some teachers who didn't, but
I know a few, yes.
Okay, but we've got 100% here that do enjoy it. Okay,
excellent.
There's a quite a nice question actually here. So the question from the community is, how can we teach grammar in a more meaningful and communicative way, which goes back to what you were talking about. So have you got any ideas for that, Zainab, do you think?
Yes, definitely. So going back to what you said about teaching it in context. So we need to think about grammar as communication and not a set of rules. So if you're teaching in a way where students get to communicate with the grammar points that you are teaching, and not just making sure that they're actually writing the structure correctly, it does make a difference. Also, a lot of teachers tend to say that students find grammar very boring. And I think it might be because a lot of teachers are lecturing during a grammar lesson. It's more about, okay, this is the rule, this is how we write it, this is when we use it, now practice, here's a worksheet. And I think in many situations, it would be better to allow students to discover the language rules themselves, instead of having them, just giving them examples and then having them practice. So for example, I'd like to show an example of how I used to teach the past simple.
Okay.
So this worked very well, and it worked very well with beginners. So I used to teach this to beginner level students who, have just learned the present simple and are now taking the past simple. And it requires 0 resources. It just needs a board and a marker. You don't need to have any artistic skills, because obviously you can see that I don't know how to draw. So a stick man is just fine. So I would just draw someone, and I would give him or her any name. So here we have a random name, Tom, and this is Tom now in 2026. So Steve, can you tell us anything you notice about Tom?
I think he's sad.
Yeah.
I'm not sure why, but he's sad. He probably needs something to eat. He's quite thin.
Yes, maybe he's hungry.
Yeah, so that might be why he's he's also wearing glasses, and he doesn't have any hair.
Very good. Excellent. Okay. We're going to now look at Tom 20 years ago. Oops. So this is Tom in 2006.
Okay.
What do you notice about Tom here?
Well, okay, maybe he's happy about being thin in this.
So remember, we're talking about the past. So,
okay. So he was happy in 2006. He had some hair, which is obviously maybe making him happy. And he didn't wear glasses in 2006.
Excellent. Very good. So this is a great way to get students to discover the rules themselves and not, just explain the rules, give them examples, and then tell them to work it out. So you would actually just have them discover it. And then what's nice is you can personalize it as well. So here I just use someone random. So you could personalize it by bringing a picture of yourself, now and 20 years ago. Students love that. Anytime you personalize something, whether it's about them or about you as a teacher, students love learning about their teachers. Use examples that they can relate to as well. Sometimes the course book might have examples that the learners can't really relate to. Change them. Use examples that they can relate to. And then obviously when you have them do the communicative task, make sure that it's something that they enjoy doing. So something like a game or a role play, an activity where they can use the language, but then at the same time have fun. So this is a nice way of getting students to enjoy grammar lessons.
I think what's really nice about that kind of picture, Zainab, is obviously it's really simple and easy to use. You don't need a lot of resources. But I think it's like really adaptable to lots of different language points. Like you used it for the past simple. When I was replying to your questions, I thought, oh, I'm using words like it might, it could be. So you could use it for
definitely
like modal verbs. That would be a nice way to do it. You could use it for used to. So like it's really adaptable. I think you're mentioning obviously about then obviously using pictures of yourself, but then you could maybe use pictures of celebrities or kind of famous people that learners know. And then you could also do it as a kind of picture dictation, couldn't you? You could kind of say, you could ask the learners to draw a picture of themselves now and in the past, and then they have to describe the pictures to their partner, and they could draw the picture of the person then and the picture of the person now, and then compare and see how close it is. And that's always fun, isn't it?
Yes, it is. They enjoy that.
So that's really nice. I think that's one thing that's quite good about using things very simple, like a kind of stick man or something like that. I mean, the students like it because it's kind of a joke and they can see, oh, my teacher can't draw. I can draw better than my teacher. But it's also kind of the fact that you can do so many different things. And I was talking to you before about when I put a stick man, for example, in a hole.
Yeah.
You just draw him in a hole, and then you can use it as a kind of task to introduce the language, where you say, okay, so what happened to him? Or it was Tom, wasn't it? So what happened to Tom? Why is he in the hole? And you can use it for the present perfect. What has happened to Tom? Or maybe for futures, like what is he going to do? How is he going to get out? And you can give, because one thing you can do also with grammar is to give them like a problem, can't you? To solve, and they have to use the language to try and solve it, which can be more meaningful.
Yeah, and the good thing about using stick people is it takes no time. So you're not wasting any time in the class.
No, totally. And I think sometimes we can overthink how we're going to plan and like do a lesson and think of all these worksheets and everything. So it's good. Okay, we've got some more people as well. We've got people from Sudan, from Egypt, Ivory Coast, Peru, which is great. And there's some interesting comments. So from Facebook, and we've got, I think organizing ideas is important too for speaking and writing for when they're doing productive practice. And I think that like using images can help with the organization, like the image you had, Zainab. And there's one about the rules, because we were talking about that. I think it isn't necessary to teach every grammar rule, only if the grammar item is related to the main topic and gives a significant meaning to the context, which is a really nice comment.
Of course.
Okay. So I think I saw another question somewhere. It's like this kind of goes to that comment as well. Is like, are grammar rules important? Like, do you actually think that we need to teach the rules, or is it okay for the learners maybe just to learn through practice, as this comment makes? What do you think?
I think it depends on the learners. So you mentioned earlier, if you're teaching young learners, I mean, why would you teach them the rules? You would want them to learn it through discovery, through play. They kind of just pick up the language, or they learn it as chunks more than rules. So you wouldn't want to be teaching rules to young learners. But then you also have some complex grammar points where students would need to have a rule so that they can create sentences. So I think it depends on the situation. It depends on the learners. Sometimes, yes, I think it is important that we teach grammar rules and that they know the rules so they can make meaningful sentences. But in some situations, it's we teach it as a functional language. We teach it as a chunk, and they don't actually have to know the rule behind it.
Yeah, definitely. There's a comment actually from YouTube where someone says that you can support young learners with sentence frames, so they don't necessarily need the grammar. Definitely. You can just have something like I did with I wish. You could just have I wish I had, and then the students could write an idea that goes in there, and then they could share those ideas in a kind of discussion with their partner or in a group or something like that.
That's a good point, because that brings us to some of the comments we got about how to teach grammar to mixed ability classes. So we got a few comments about I've got a mixed ability class. How do I teach a grammar point? And I think when it comes to grammar, you can totally teach the same grammar point to a mixed ability class, but you would just have to differentiate. So using prompts or sentence starters for those who need more support, or allowing those who need more support to create simpler sentences, but then the stronger ones to produce more complex sentences, putting them in pairs. If you want to differentiate the tasks, you can put the stronger students together and the other students together, or you can pair a stronger student with a lower level student where they can help each other. So the lower level student is getting more support, and then the stronger student is consolidating what they already know. So it benefits both. So yeah, this is just to answer the question about mixed ability. Definitely you can do it. You just have to think about how you want to differentiate in that lesson.
Yeah, and one way I've done that with, for example, we were talking before about discovering the grammar. One thing that I've done before with that is with categorizing. So sometimes, let's say you've got I've done it when I was teaching, for example, present perfect and past simple, so the difference between them. So you'd have like a list of sentences that use present perfect or past simple. And then for the kind of stronger students, you can ask them to, look at the sentences and put them in two groups. So you don't give them any guidance about how to categorize them. They have to do it themselves. Whereas weaker students, you could say, look at the verbs, group them into past simple and present perfect. So you're more kind of directive. You're kind of telling them what you want them to notice. Whereas stronger students should be able to do it naturally. So that's one way that you can do it. And categorizing is always quite good fun because you can do it in lots of different ways. You can give learners slips of paper that they have to kind of move it across, or you could even start it, for example, as a kind of running dictation where you put the sentences outside the room or around the room. One learner goes, reads the sentence, brings it back to the other learner writes it down. And then once they've got all the sentences, then they can categorize them after that.
Yeah, that's excellent.
Yeah, and there's a comment actually about role play. So one, which is definitely useful for teaching grammar. So giving real life scenarios where the structures are used, and then helping the learners become kind of confident about when to use it and how to use it. But that also kind of links a little bit with functional language as well, which is also part of the Understanding Language Systems course. And it's kind of a crossover, isn't it, between grammar and functions, where you can use a bit of both.
We need both.
Yeah, definitely, to be able to do different things. So what's the best way, do you think, to teach functional language, or what way do you use, Zainab, when you're teaching functions?
Yeah, so with functional language, first of all, it's extremely important because, just because they understand grammar, they still need to know how to use it and, when to use it in real life situations. So that's where functional language, plays a role. And I think the most important thing to do when you're teaching functional language is to teach it in context. You don't want to just give them a list of functional language and, okay, memorize this. You want to create some kind of context where they're actually using it in a real life situation. So for example, whether it's role play, whether it's a game, whether it's a video that they watch and then a dialogue that they have to create. So you want to create some kind of context where they're actually able to use that functional language. And I do have another idea here that I'd like to share with you. So something that's a fun way to get students using functional language in real life situations is I would have some flashcards. So a number of flashcards would have places, for example, at a restaurant, in a shop, at school, for example. And then you would have another set of flashcards with sentence starters for functional language. So you would have, could you, I'm sorry, I'd like, and then you would have students put these face down.
Okay.
And they would have to choose a card from each. So for example, I'm just going to choose randomly for you, Steve. I have here at the doctor's.
Okay.
And here I have, excuse me. So could you create a sentence that you would use if you were in this situation?
Excuse me, can I speak to the doctor, please?
Excellent. Okay. And then what you could do after that is have the other students in the group continue the dialogue.
Okay.
So that's just starting the dialogue, and then the rest continue. And then they choose another set of cards and they create another dialogue together. So it's a fun way. You're putting them in a real life situation, and they'd have to think about what they would say in that situation. And I think that would be a good way to teach functional language.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. And I think kind of dialogue building really helps, because maybe you could get them to try it out first and see what they can do. And then you can maybe give an example to help them afterwards, like a kind of similar situation, like at the doctor's, and then you'd give them a kind of a typical dialogue. I mean, one thing that I've done maybe with teens more than with young learners, but with teens, kind of building a dialogue with them, and you get it on the board. And one thing that I've found, and I'm sure we've talked about this before, Zainab, is like a disappearing dialogue, where you have the dialogue on the board and the students practice it in pairs, and then the teacher deletes 3 or 4 words, and then they have to repeat it, and then just keep on deleting it until there's nothing there, and then the learners have to kind of create the dialogue together. They find that quite fun because it's quite competitive, but it's also like that kind of element of kind of challenge. Yeah. And there is actually another question, which, I mean, they've related it to grammar, but I think it's also kind of related to functional language. And it says, it's from Facebook, and it says, how can we implement scaffolding when we want to teach grammar in an engaging and interactive way? So for example, that disappearing dialogue has scaffolding, because you have the text, and then you slowly take the scaffolding away, you take the language away to kind of help them kind of practice and communicate. Is there any other ways that you kind of scaffold grammar or functional lessons, Zainab, to help your learners?
Yeah, well, I think if you're teaching a grammar lesson and you start off with a context, and you show them pictures, for example, and you get some ideas from them first, you're kind of getting them thinking about it, which makes it easier for them to understand later. And then, by asking these concept check questions, you are slowly, moving them from the general questions you were asking them at the beginning, just to generate some interest, to, getting the grammar rule out of them, and then also when to use it. So I think the key is to have a context, generate interest first, and then slowly ask concept check questions. Just elicit the ideas out of them. And I know a lot of teachers sometimes think that, how can I get the ideas out of the students if they've never been taught this grammar rule? but you'd be surprised. There's always someone in the classroom who will give you the correct answer. So I think, yes, that would probably be the best way to scaffold and to get is to elicit, create a context, generate interest, and then start eliciting ideas until you get them to what you want them to understand. You get them to the reason why we're using this sentence and then the structure as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point that you make, Zainab, is like about there's always somebody that will know the answer or have an idea of what the answer is. And I think because sometimes we can go into a kind of grammar or functions lesson where we think, okay, this is what I'm going to teach. And we can sometimes assume that it's new for the learners, but they've spent time on social media. They've spent time on their phones. They get exposed to more English than
they pick it up.
Yeah, than other kids did like 20 years ago or something like that. So they pick up a lot more. Like I know people that learn language through playing like gaming online. Like you can pick up an awful lot doing that. And I think one thing to always remember with grammar is to kind of trust your learners and trust that they probably know more than we think they know.
Yeah. And even if they don't know, that's fine. You got them thinking. So even if nobody gave you the correct answer, the fact that they tried and they gave whatever answer they know is still better than just giving it to them. Always try to get them to think about it. It's more memorable. They will remember it better than if you just told them it.
Yes, exactly. And I think that is a key point, is that like getting them to actually do it and kind of talk about it and try to understand it themselves. Because if they're going through that process, it sticks more, doesn't it? It kind of sticks in their head. Okay. I think there was, so there's a comment kind of related to that. It's kind of the best way to teach functional languages through real life contexts. So they should hear or see the language first in an authentic situation, then notice useful expressions, practice them in pair and group work, and use them in meaningful role plays or real communication. And that's a really good that's a great way of explaining it, like in terms of kind of like the steps that you have to go through. Sometimes I flip it. So sometimes I would ask the learners to do the task first and see what they can do with what they already know. Especially when it comes to something like a kind of problem solving thing. So like maybe you can start a lesson by saying, oh, I've got a headache. I don't know what to do. Work with your partners, think what should I do in this situation, and then that situation will help them come up with maybe functional language for advice or suggestions. And then we can kind of board it. Maybe I can give them some more examples, and then they can come up with other problems that they have, like headache, backache, insomnia, whatever it is, and then they can create kind of dialogues based on that. And you can get through quite a lot, because I know most lessons are kind of 40, 45 minutes. But if you go straight in with the task and what you're kind of focusing on, then I think it's fine. Okay, there's one final question I think we've probably just got time for, is how do you balance teaching grammatical accuracy with encouraging students to communicate confidently, which is a good question. How do you do that?
Well, you would have to think about what the reason behind the communicative task is. So are you focusing on accuracy? Did you just teach a grammar concept and you want to make sure that they're actually using it correctly? If that's the reason, then yes, I would correct. I would ask them to repeat the sentence, or I would give them the correct answer. I would use a method of correction. However, if you are asking them to do this task for fluency, then I wouldn't really correct all their mistakes. Maybe make a note of some of their mistakes, and then you can have a general feedback at the end, or maybe just correct mistakes that impede communication or hinder communication. So if everybody understands everybody and there are some mistakes and it's a fluency activity, then there's no reason to interrupt them. You just might want to take some notes and then have a general feedback with them later. But if you had just taught, a grammar concept, and you want them to use it correctly, then here I would focus on accuracy and I would correct them.
Yeah, definitely. That sounds like a good rule of thumb.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for your questions today. Lots of good comments. If we haven't replied to your question or your comments, we'll definitely do it in the group. Next week, we have another event, which is a community corner. So, which is going to be focusing on teaching English in primary. So obviously bring, again, questions that you have about teaching primary learners, and both Zainab and I are quite happy to discuss the things that you want to mention. And on Friday as well, there is another event, isn't there, Zainab?
Yes, there is the webinar, so a practical introduction to knowing the subject, and that Steve and I will be co-hosting. So make sure you're there.
Join us. Yes. So please join us for that as well. And we'll be looking at kind of, I think it's mainly we're going to be looking at ways to kind of help our learners with listening and pronunciation, and what we need to know to teach those effectively. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us and all your questions. Hope you all have a good week, and we'll see you at the webinar, hopefully, and next week at the next event.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.